Good morning and welcome to Global Healthcast, brought to you by Global Health Press. In this podcast series, once a week, we bring to you news and views about public health, vaccines, and vaccination. I am Joe Schmidt, and with me, as always, is Dr. Melvin Sanikas. Good morning to Switzerland. Good morning, Melvin.
Good morning, Professor Schmidt. Good afternoon, good evening to those who are watching or listening to us today.
Our topics today are about a scanner generating 3D images in seconds, and that gives you an early diagnosis for some diseases. It appears that diabetes type 1 may be cured by stem cell injections. We now have a better understanding why flu vaccines are less effective in older people. I will cover influenza vaccine strains in the Northern Hemisphere for the upcoming season, COVID vaccines around the globe, what are the recommendations, and we have an update on Oropouche-virus in Brazil. Melvin, you start with this new handheld scanner. What is the story here?
Yes, so in the study published in Nature Biomedical Engineering, the team showed their technology can deliver photoacoustic tomography, or PAT, imaging scans to doctors in real time, providing them with accurate and intricate images of blood vessels, helping inform patient care, right? So photoacoustic tomography imaging uses laser-generated ultrasound waves to visualize subtle changes like early markers of disease in the less than millimeter scale veins and arteries up to 15 millimeters deep in human tissues. However, up until now, existing PAT or PAT technology has been too slow to produce high enough quality 3D images for use by clinicians. And the older PAT scanners took more than 5 minutes to take an image, but by reducing that time to a few seconds or less, image quality is more improved and far more suitable for people who are frail or really in a bad condition health-wise, right? And so this new scanner could help diagnose cancer, could help diagnose cardiovascular diseases and arthritis in 3 to 5 years' time, subject to further testing, of course, right? So the 3 to 5 years' time is what they say the timeline when this machine could be in the clinics. So I think this is really interesting because at the moment we don't have this kind of technology.
It's wonderful. It's an additional diagnostic tool. When I started in pediatrics in the 1980s, we hardly had ultrasound, and then we had a little bit of regular X-rays. We then had CT scans and finally MRIs. And this is now with real good ultrasound machines and with more real life functional options on ultrasound. This is a real new tool. It sounds very, very exciting. Yeah. Melvin, you have a second story on type 1 diabetes and how to cure it with stem cell injections. What's this?
So in this new study, researchers have published results in the journal Cell, and they talked about a patient who was cured from type 1 diabetes because of stem cells, right? So they actually used stem cells and injected it in this 25-year-old woman, and after a year, she was still producing her own insulin. The team noted that the patient was already receiving immunosuppressant drugs due to a prior liver transplant. So it is still not known if her immune system will replicate the type of attack that led to her having a type 1 diabetes in the first place. But I think in general, this is a very interesting case of someone who had type 1 diabetes and got cured because of stem cells injected into her.
Excellent. So very good news. At least it seems to be possible in principle that using stem cells, type 1 diabetes may be curable. Very interesting. Melvin, your third story is about why older people have, why vaccines work less well. Actually, we know immune responses go down as of age 30, but this is a little bit deeper understanding why that happens, right?
Yes, correct. And so I think this one is really interesting because we always talk about immunosenescence when we get older, that the immune system is not working as good as it was before, right? But this is giving us more detail. The study was based on a cohort of over 200 participants over the age of 65 who were vaccinated against flu. Blood was taken from them at a total of 5 different times before and after vaccination. This was examined in detail using latest molecular biology methods, which are summarized under the term multi-omics, right? We always hear about the omics. And in this study, they were able to identify a number of important molecules that correlated with a good immune response of responders after vaccination. In the non-responders, however, the signature molecules were reduced or not detected at all. And unlike the responders, the non-responders showed an increased number of certain activated immune cells in the blood, so-called the natural killer cells. And the difference that we were able to identify in this study, they were indeed quite clear, showing that interleukin 15 appears to be responsible for the lack of sufficient immune response and could therefore be a good predictive biomarker for effectiveness of flu vaccines in the elderly.
So maybe, the question then would be if interleukin 15 is just a marker to tell you something is wrong, or if it causes the reduced response. Probably, as this is a functional molecule, it probably is directly associated with the lower protection rate induced by influenza vaccination in elderly subjects, right?
Yep. So I think that is still under research. We want to know whether this is actually causing it or this is just a biomarker telling us that with this specific biomarker, the immunogenicity of the flu vaccine in an elderly is lower.
Yeah. Very interesting study. I guess with the new molecular technologies and insights on proteomics and whatever, we really understand much more on what we know already, what we have observed, and now we get a deeper understanding of why that all happens. Very exciting times, very, very exciting. You have additional information on flu here, and maybe you summarize what we see on the slide here.
Yes, because we are just talking about flu, right? And I know in the next slide you also have another topic on flu. So this is just a reminder for everyone. This infographic is from the World Heart Foundation. Is really really interesting. It summarizes why we need to get flu vaccines, especially those people who have heart problems, because when you are infected by flu or influenza, your chances of having a stroke or heart attack is much if you are not infected. So it's a reminder for everyone.
Yeah. Excellent. Very nice summary. Thanks for sharing with us and thanks for finding. And as we speak about flu, in my next slide, I just summarized the influenza vaccine composition recommended for this year. Vaccine has already been produced. It usually takes like roughly 6 months. There are basically 3 or 4 types of vaccine out there. 90% of all vaccines against influenza in the world are egg-based, still today, fertilized eggs, and they should contain 3 strains, H1N1, pandemic O9-like virus, H3N2, seasonal vaccine, and then B, Victoria lineage-like virus. For cell culture or recombinant-based vaccines, a different set of viruses is recommended. It's also H1N1, H3N2, and it's also Victoria B lineage, but it's a little bit different because the original viruses recommended by WHO, they may not replicate well in egg, in fertilized eggs or in cell culture. So you look around if similar strains like viruses, if they grow better in your eggs or in your cell culture, and that's then what you use. For more affluent countries, usually quadrivalent products are recommended, and these have an additional B lineage, the Yamagati like virus that is listed at the end of this list here. Melvin, any questions to this slide?
Just a comment, Professor. I remember when I started studying vaccinology in 2011, more than a decade ago, we were already talking about, oh, maybe flu vaccines will be cell culture soon, right? And now we see over 10 years after, it is not yet the case. As you mentioned, most vaccines are still egg based. And it's not just the technology or science, right? There's so many factors. There's politics, economics, infrastructure, and so many other things. Just to remind us that even though science and technology is there, it doesn't mean that it will be everywhere, right? It will
Yeah,
not be the case for the whole world. So, yeah,
yeah.
I think that's a very interesting point, just to say.
And to add on that story, much more to tell about. But in Germany, cell culture based influenza vaccines were first licensed during the 2009-10 pandemic with influenza H1N1. And there was one German member of parliament who was a physician who had no idea about vaccines and vaccination. And he said these vaccines would cause cancer. And he strongly recommended to not use them. The whole thing is fake news, as it was at that time as today, but that killed the technology in Germany. And I think it was then sold to the American army somewhere in the United States. They now use cell culture or produce cell culture vaccine. I don't know if the cell culture vaccine is still produced in Germany. Having said this, let's switch to COVID-19 vaccines. And again, very similar recommendations all around the globe. I summarized an extract of recommendations from the USA. So basically, the FDA approved the Omicron JN1 lineage, which is an Omicron lineage, and the subvariant KP2. So these are the two strains used around the globe. Moderna and Pfizer, with their mRNA technology, use the KP2 subvariant, and Novavax uses the JN1 strain. The vaccine in the United States is recommended for all persons as of 6 months of age to target the currently licensed SARS coronavirus strains. For Germany, the German Vaccination Advisory Board and EMA, the advisory board, the NITEC, recommends that there should be a basic immunity in everybody aged 18 years or older and also in pregnant women. And basic immunity means 3 SARS coronavirus 2 antigen contacts. And of these 3 contacts, 1 antigen contact has to be a vaccine dose. And they call this hybrid immunity. And they state that this basic immunity will protect from severe disease and death, and more doses are needed in risk subjects under 18 years or over 18 years. Actually, that should be changed here on the slide. And again, they recommend the same vaccines as they are licensed and recommended in the United States. In the UK, they focus on hospitalization. They want to make sure that their hospitals are not clogged by by patients with COVID. So they recommend booster doses for everybody aged 65 years, residents in nursery homes, and for risk persons as of 6 months to 64 years of age. So this is very similar to what we see in Germany. And again, the vaccines that they have are Pfizer and Moderna. In the UK, the Novavax vaccine is not available as far as I can see. In Singapore, it is focused or it is recommended that COVID-19 vaccination protects against severe disease, and it protects the healthcare system from being overwhelmed. Very similar from what we read in the UK. Vaccination is free of charge, and available vaccines under the National Vaccination Program are, again, the 3 vaccines that I just mentioned. Melvin, any comments on the COVID vaccine recommendations?
Well, I think this is good that we are still, as a global health community, monitoring all these different variants, right? So that we can update the strains accordingly, which we have been doing for flu for the past many decades, right? And I think this will become the norm moving forwards.
Yeah. Excellent work by WHO and researchers that work with and for or under WHO. And then I think the last is my favorite virus around the globe, which is the Oropouche-virus, which I discovered a year ago. I had no idea what this is. It was detected in the 1950s, and now there is an Oropouche fever outbreak, specifically in Brazil. That includes risks for the public health and also for travelers to the region. And to date, we have more than 7,900 cases by August 2024. And this is 10 times higher than the 773 cases that were reported in 2023. I think the reason for this tenfold increase, at least part of the explanation, may be the availability of cheap ELISA tests for the virus and the access to such tests. I may be wrong. It may also have to do with awareness. We simply don't know. I'm not sure if this is a real increase or just an increase that is caused by better diagnostics and more awareness. However, what we know now, what we learned in the last 12 months is there were 2 miscarriages in women infected during pregnancy. Currently, the viral genetic material is still under investigation from the umbilical cord. We know that various organs and tissues of the stillborns were infected. There were also at least 8 cases of fetal malformations that are linked with the Oropouche virus infection. 2 deaths occurred with a direct correlation of viral infection, and this is certainly of concern. So Oropouche is a potentially lethal viral infection. 2 notes I added here. The 500 cases of Oropouche infection that we have known about since 1955 could be an underestimate because in the past there was no rapid and cheap ELISA detection test. And number 2, it is very important to increase awareness, to increase prevention and surveillance among the populations in the affected areas, but also we have to tell travelers, particularly women of childbearing age, if they want to travel to these areas. Melvin, any comments on this old new virus?
Yeah, I am reminded by what we learned from Zika many years ago. A virus that has been there, but we just didn't know that it existed. And then now that we're knowing more and more about it, we're seeing that it's actually quite prevalent than we imagined. And so I would imagine that in the next few years, we will still continue to hear more about this. But in terms of public health implications, I guess we have to play it by ear.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. With that, I think we are at the end of our presentations today about a new scanner with 3D images that helps us in early diagnosis of various diseases, about the potential cure of diabetes type 1 with stem cell transplantation. We understand now better why flu vaccines may be less effective or are less effective in the elderly, perhaps due to interleukin 15. We spoke about influenza vaccination in 24-25, who should get vaccinated and what the recommended vaccines are. We spoke about COVID-19 vaccine recommendations around the globe. I highlighted 4 countries, and we spoke about the Oropouche virus outbreak in Brazil and in the Amazon area. And with that, we come to our last joke of the week. Good news, your cholesterol has stayed the same, but research findings have changed. And this is the problem, I think, specifically when it comes to nutrition and all fields in medicine where we rely largely on observational studies. If you only observe results but cannot double-blind randomize the treatment or the outcome evaluation, then you are stuck, and in the end, you may have to change your recommendations. Melvin, any last views on cholesterol and health?
No, I think it's funny that you mentioned cholesterol because for research, it depends on what you're giving, who you're giving it to, and what you're looking at, right? Because, for example, eating eggs, right? you always hear eating eggs on the news. It's always good, bad, good, bad, good, bad. I don't know what's right anymore, right?
Yeah. So again, the problem is we rely on observational studies. You cannot do a double-blind randomized studies using X or no X, right? You cannot do it. You cannot blind it. You cannot blind it to begin with. And number two, who would want to check how many X a person has eaten? And by the way, the X may be hidden in some nutrients that you don't even know about.
Mhm.
That there is cholesterol or that there is X in the nutrition. In any way, Melvin, it was a pleasure to share my slides with you today. Thank you very much for joining. Goodbye, and see you again next week.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.